first that I put out. Okay, so I'm just going to touch on the synopsis for the case. There's actually quite a bit of material to go through, so hopefully we can get through a good chunk of it. 7 months after the Columbia accident, the Columbia Accident Investigation Board presented a report on the cause of the accident. So 7 months. The board pinpointed the technical issue that caused the accident and identified organizational issues within NASA dating back decades. The CAIB also reported how managers might have behaved differently during the mission and stressed the organizational shortcomings at NASA that contributed to the catastrophe. So I'm just assuming everyone's already written their case up and turned it in.
Yep.
So hopefully you're familiar with the case facts. So the first question was, what is the issue? What's the issue? What has occurred? What in this last mission? There's several things that stood out. Of course, one was there was a technical problem. But what were other issues that led to the final result?
Well, there were some how to phrase this, organizational shortcomings that really pushed it was the catalyst for allowing something like this to happen. Like the bureaucracy. I mean, I thought that this case study was actually really interesting because it's the first public entity that we've really gone through. We usually go through companies and things like that, but this is government. This is the executive branch of the government here, and they have a very difficult time navigating through the bureaucracy and the red tape. And so I think that was a big contributing factor to the accident. Was the environment wasn't really conducive to such pinpoint accurate results that they required. Like, it's really hard to do a project like this and not have something go wrong, especially when you were talking about the government, because that's just a track record.
What do you think, Tamara?
My biggest thing is, even from the very beginning, when they first started doing the shuttle launches, the foam pieces kept breaking off, and they could never figure out why and why it was always that one side. And so my thinking is, why? I don't know. I mean, they kept saying, oh, we just can't figure it out. We can't figure it out. And it got to the point it became so quote unquote normal that they made it an acceptable risk. And when you have pieces of something falling off, I think that's kind of important to figure out why. I mean, because you're playing with people's lives, because you're thinking, oh, it's no big deal. It always happens. Nothing ever happened on the last mission, so nothing's going to happen on this mission. Well, like that one guy said in there, they're playing Russian roulette. Eventually something's going to happen, and they just decided it was normal.
I thought just from the outset, this idea that it was routine, that it was just an airplane. It's an airplane, and it's going into space. So, they and the other thing that stood out to me was the amount of pressure they put on themselves to perform, to continue to get funding, made them kind of push through stuff and ignore things. And that stood out to me too. I'm like, if it's always happening on the same side, you'd think that that's a systemic problem. This is solvable.
Yep.
But they just never take the time, because they're like, well, we got to turn around. We got to get the turnaround. We got to, we're supposed to get out 50 flights a year. We've got to show that we can, do this and do that. Anyway, it was very sad to see kind of the disregard that occurred based on that resulted in the loss of life. I mean, and I talked to my son about it quite a bit, because he's big into the space program and flight and all those things. And, he's watched all those videos of, the test pilots that have died in Russia, and, all kinds of tragedies that have occurred through trying to innovate. So it was interesting to talk about the organizational aspects that affected it. You know, you always think, oh, the plane broke, so they crashed, but you don't think about the organizational aspects.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So the recovery window. What was their recovery window? What was?
We basically had 15 days. I mean, 16 days, I guess you could say, to figure it out and to figure it out. And what shocked, what just shocked me is that, this committee that was put together, it should have been a tiger team in the first place, just because the size that had fallen off was bigger than they had seen before. And so that should have warranted an emergency, whatever. But the fact that the communication was disregarded, they asked even for the astronauts to go out and do a spacewalk. Oh, no, can't do that. We'll get behind schedule. I'm thinking, you got to be kidding me. If someone thinks it's serious enough and could cause potential harm, you stop and drop what you're doing, because you're playing with people's lives. And they should have done something to get somebody out there or get those images they needed to do a better search and better imagery to find out exactly what happened. And they didn't.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that they weren't even meeting every day, which was what they were supposed to do. They didn't even find out that it happened until 2 days later. They're like, oh, look at that. Look, we looked at the video and something bad happened. And then they start this kind of slow snail process of that. Yeah, I was really surprised by the response of, the big piece of foam goes off and they're like, well, we're not going to get imaging. You didn't go through the right channels. They just wanted, which kind of goes to the second part of the discussion, which is the bias at play. This idea that it's never caused problems before, therefore it will not cause problems. And so that's everything they looked at had to result in that answer. So instead of approaching it as what's the problem, identify the problem, it was identify that everything's okay.
Yeah, I think this is a very tricky case to look at from an organizational standpoint, because there's so many different, I guess, variables or things that are going on. Like, you have the organizational culture at NASA, you have the political culture at NASA, which was, I think, bigger than the case study even let on, even though it was stressed pretty heavily. You've got the technological issue of working through a project of this magnitude, sending people into space. It's a pretty big undertaking. You have the fact that this really hadn't been done much before, and their perspective on the issue was, yeah, is there a problem, rather than this is not working as intended, how do we fix it? I think just their perspective in general on what is a problem and what isn't a problem, it helped contribute to the disaster.
The instructions talk about confirmation bias, the idea that we have a tendency to look for information that confirms our own views rather than outside of that. What evidence do you guys see of the confirmation bias occurring in the case?
Well, I noticed the what do they call it? The crater analysis, I think is what it was called.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they use that model, and even people within NASA said, yeah, that model's pretty much useless, but we're going to use it anyway because we've used it before, and when we use it, nothing happens. So they were using that model, but it was flawed from the start. It was like, why are you even touching that? You shouldn't even be using it.
Yeah. What about you, Tamara?
Where is it? I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget, and now I can't find it, but that's okay. Where is it? Oh, they contacted one of the experts. His name is that Schomburg. He was an expert on some of the panels that they used, but not the right kind of panels that were affected. So I think they contacted the wrong people to get their confirmation, because this guy was saying, "Oh, there's nothing wrong with these RCC panels," but he wasn't an expert on the RCC panels. He was an expert on something else. And so I think they used him to say, "Oh, everything's good to go. So let's just move forward with it."
It kind of reminds me. Oh, go ahead.
No, I'm done. Go ahead, Michelle.
Oh, I was just thinking, it reminds me of what it's like to go search for information online. Are you really looking for answers, or are you looking for confirmation? It's kind of the same thing. Like if you have that tight culture at NASA, and you kind of get hints of it through the case of, you know, why didn't that man send Roche? Why didn't he send that email? And it has to do with the relationships within NASA. And the way, you know, and you lean toward the people that pat you on the back and say, good job, you know, and I kind of thought the same thing where, you know, they're asking all the right people, the ones that for their own, to get their own feelings confirmed, because they're focused completely outside of the problem. They just say, we got to turn around, we have this next mission. They're focused on the next mission. They're not focused on this mission. It was a routine kind of, that was described I watched a video on it. It says it's not a very sexy mission. It was just a couple of experiments. It was like, you know, it was not the next mission was a big one. So they're like, just get them out there, get it done, get them home, you know, whatever. The other kind of bias, well, it talked about shared cognitive framing, when like a group of people adopt all the same assumptions and beliefs to simplify something that's complex. And that definitely is at play here. We've got a very, very complex, I mean, it's like I said, they think, oh, it's an airplane and we're going to send some people up to do some stuff and come home. But it's not an airplane. It is a spacecraft that has to re-enter the atmosphere at incredible heat levels. It is, what do they call it? They called it the Hangar Queen. It's the oldest space-worthy, well, if you want to call it space-worthy shuttle, and it was known for its issues of turnaround. And, you know, they're just treating it still like, hey, you know, it's technology, and technology is cool, and it does cool things. So it's like, I don't know, it's a little more complex than that. Have you seen inside that machine? Anyway, it's like there was a divide of not understanding the complexity and the little things that can cause big problems, which of course some of the engineers understood. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I was thinking in the very beginning of the case study, it talked about one of the biggest problems is that they treated it, like you said earlier, they treated it as routine. And space flight is not routine. It's actually still very, very experimental. And so instead of treating it experimental, that things probably will go wrong, definitely could go wrong, let's take it nice and slow and figure things out. It was, oh yeah, it's, you know, hard to launch, easy to fly. And you're going, okay, but we're still space, and it's still it's not an exact science. Even 40 odd years later, it's still not an exact science, and people still don't quite understand all that's involved with it. And they mitigated the risks and just kind of pushed them aside.
There's an interesting question in here, and it's kind of to me, I usually read through the questions before I read the case to kind of get a feel of where they're looking for us to head. And the question is, where did the problems for Columbia begin? So what are your thoughts on that?
The very beginning. I mean, the very beginning. Before they even built the dumb machine.
Tell me about that.
Well, first of all, budget constraints. They didn't build the one that they wanted to in the first place. I mean, they didn't even put an escape hatch in the Columbia because they figured, what's the point? It's probably gonna be a safe enough vehicle. We don't need to worry about them escaping. I'm thinking, you gotta be kidding me.
So it's the Titanic of space.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, so it was designed wrong, totally flawed from the very, very beginning.
Yeah, I thought that like, I think the root of this all stemmed from the space race with the Soviets, and that's just where it started. So you had the competition between the United States and the Soviets about who can get to space first, right? That was the whole idea after Sputnik was launched. And now through the years, the mentality and the culture of the space race was, we have a deadline, we have to keep to the deadline if we want to beat the Soviets. If we fail on the deadline, then the Soviets are winning. And I didn't grow up during the Cold War. That's just how old I am. But I can see what that line of thinking may may bring out in a project like this. And so when you start out as a political competition between two countries and you start to cut corners because you got to keep the momentum going, you got to keep the project on pace and on schedule, then yeah, you do end up with a recipe for some things going wrong and some tragedies happening. Like I out of my own curiosity, I saw some videos about some of the Soviet accidents that they were running into when they were trying to get into space, and there were quite a few of them, but the Soviets didn't know about it because they kept it all hush hush unless it was a success. But on our side, it was okay. We're accountable to the public and the people for what we do, and we want to make this very open and transparent. And they weren't really working openly and transparently. It was lots of the issues were swept under the rug. They're trying to cut corners, and it made the space program and NASA look pretty bad with some of the things that happened. So I think that that's kind of where it started, and then it morphed and evolved as time went on into the point where the Columbia exploded.
I looked up some of that Russian stuff too. They said they really can't quantify how many people have died, like in China and Russia. They kind of keep it close to the vest, but they do know that 160 people died in a ground explosion for a
I
long.
didn't hear about that.
It was interesting, and I was thinking about that route too, where it started out, and I understand a little bit about the space race as pertains to national security.
Yeah, that too.
But what happened for me, when I was looking at it, was when NASA switched from a national security issue, with okay, we got to get satellites in space, we need to be able to see what's going on, what's being launched. That was the deal with the space race, was concerns with people not our allies, but when they shifted to exploration, they thought, well, let's build a space station. Let's put people out in space. Let's make a bus that can travel back and forth to the space station. There was not that shift of, okay, we can slow this puppy down. Let's do this right. Let's take our time and let's see what we can do. Let's look at the possibilities. Let's make adjustments. It was just, this is what we're going to do, and we're going to do it first. We're going to get out there, and there was going to be I forget what the dates were, but it was something like a 10-person space station in 1974, and a 20-person in 1980, and a 50-person by 1985, and they were going to have this big space station with a shuttle going back and forth, and it was going to be amazing and put people out in space. And then they ended up with a couple of administrations that said, no, that's not our plan. And then, so in order to save the program, they're like, well, then we'll launch satellites. We can build these things really cheap, and we can launch a bunch of, we can make a lot of money launching satellites for people and doing things, through contracts. And anyway, I don't know, as a kid, the space shuttle was really cool. And I was really sad when the program ended, but now as an adult, I read this case and I think, gosh, I probably shouldn't have started,
At least the commercialized spin they wanted to put on it. Because I think that, well, this is also one of the problems when it comes to any governmental agency, is they want to protect their own interest and their own livelihood. They want to keep their budget, and so the stress and pressures that were put on them were pushing them in this direction. So I don't like getting super political, in my groups, but I mean, that's just how it is. When they get this massive budget and then all of a sudden there's huge budget cuts, they scramble and they try and do everything they can in order to get the budget that they had before, because that's what they were operating under. They don't want to lose out on funding.
Yeah, even if they're not relevant anymore.
Yeah, and so
even if they're not relevant.
Yeah, it's a really unique case that because I'm just throwing this out there. I went on NASA's website and started looking up some future missions they're planning on doing, and on a couple of them, they're like, it's scheduled to launch around this time. Like, they don't even set dates anymore for some of these things. They're like, we're expecting to launch it around this time. So,
Yeah, Yeah, look
keep
at the
yourself-
funding issue too. I mean, you can go for 4 years and have funding and then get a new president and have no funding because they had funding initially with the early stages, and then they had a couple of administrations that said no, and then they got an administration that said yes, and then after from what I understand, after Columbia, they said, okay, we're winding this down. We're winding it down. Our goal isn't to put people in space. Our goal is to explore. So let's go back to the Apollo type design. Let's put the ship on the top of the rockets instead of in the, where it won't get hit by debris. Let's explore. Let's not worry about people living in space. We don't need a bunch of astronauts in a big ship and stuff and whatever. But then that was shut down by the previous administration. So who knows? So it's like hard to do research and exploration and stuff when it's always bouncing up and down, and you always have these people to answer to who are putting different stipulations. So I really like the private sector aspect of what's going on with space right now. My son follows SpaceX quite closely, and it's pretty fascinating, how they manage differently than what we're reading about here.
Yeah, there's a lot to it, definitely.
I'm in and out, I'm kind of getting bits and pieces of the conversation.
That's fine. We all have
okay.
off weeks.
What do you think about what people stand out to you as contributors to the failure? What individuals?
Linda Ham. She just did. I mean, her whole thought process is the schedule. We gotta get back on schedule, and then that next mission where they were launching that No-2 to go to the space station. She was in charge of that whole thing, and so that's where her thoughts were. The next big thing, because I'm going to be in charge, and this is the way it's going to be. And so her thoughts weren't even on this right here, and she knew that if this mission here had some issues ever, that it would push back the schedule of the other one, and that was so important to everybody. But I think it's more important to her and her promotions and whatnot within NASA itself. And so I don't think she had the right focus at all.
What about the like the people who formed, whoever was it Linda Ham who formed the team, or was there a group of people who said, hey, we need to have a team put together? Who decided that wasn't going to be a Tiger team? I couldn't seem to, it just said they formed a team that wasn't a Tiger team.
I don't remember.
Yeah. And I kind of got the general feeling again, like you, Tamara, that Linda Ham was she was a big part of this, and the whole culture of management in there wasn't very helpful. Even the guy that sent the email saying, oh, they're fine. I'm an expert. They're good.
I'm taking marketing management right now. And last week we went through a Braun, the shaver company. We went through a case with them. And one of the things that really stood out was their attention to the product and putting all of their energy and focus into the product rather than into the company as a whole. So as an organization and as a team, your goal is to make sure that this product, which is the space shuttle and the mission, is viable and it will work. And what I've noticed is that a lot of these people who are in these manager positions at NASA weren't putting their efforts into the product. They were putting their efforts into NASA first, or their own career first. And that was, it just keeps coming up in my mind. Like, they're not putting the energy and focus into the product and, by extension, the safety of the product. They're being a little selfish with it, and they're thinking, okay, if we do well and we hit this quota, then we'll get more funding.
Yeah.
And that's a very, very old school way of thinking about it, and we see the result of that. I mean, it's not rocket science to put together these teams.
You know what? Hopefully we'll have a few minutes to go through how things turned out, because there were some very basic, very, like you said, not rocket science stuff that should have entered pretty early on that could have made such a huge difference, but where they were blind. They were completely, the biases just completely, their biases, their focus. There's another bias called motivational bias. It's when you're motivated by, like you were saying, Trevor, finances, by the budget. You're focused so wholly on this one thing to the detriment of everything else, because that you think this one thing is so important that everything else pales. And it's really sad that, they said the deal at NASA was the people on the ground, there was a kind of this quiet understanding that the people on the boat out in space would do all they could to complete their mission, and the people at home would do all they could to bring them back. And that just, if that didn't happen, it was sad. We're going to talk a little bit about the breakdown of the DAT team design. What was the purpose of the team design? What was, yeah. So they formed the DAT. Why?
Sorry, what's that acronym again? The DAT.
The DAT. The group that was supposed to,
It was in the debris assessment team.
Assessment team. Yep, yeah, the debris with Roche. The debris assessment. They formed it. What was their thinking behind that formation? What are your thoughts?
They knew something was wrong. You know what I mean? I mean, they knew it was something had happened, and it was something that had been different than all the other strikes before. And then they knew that the piece was bigger, and so.
So why not a tiger?
That one I tried to figure out, and I'm not quite sure why. Why wasn't a tiger team put together instead of? So this group of people that pretty much put themselves together because of the concerns on both the contractor side and the NASA side, realizing that we need to take a look at this. But then it was doomed to fail. I mean, there's no direct communication. Who do they even know to talk to? Because it wasn't the tiger team that it needed to be. So there wasn't the resources that they had available to them. There's no direct communication to anyone in charge. And then they tried to do their best, but I felt like they got kind of shut down in every corner because even they really didn't know what they should be doing because there's no clear direction.
Do you think they were just trying to make it look like we're meeting protocol without really addressing a problem?
Sounds like it could be an explanation for it. I wouldn't put it past some of the characters that we've read about. It sure seems in line with their view on how things should operate. Kind
of evidence of their bias, because if they were unbiased, they'd say, "Put a tiger team together. Let's make sure it's okay." But if they did, then people are like, "Oh, there's a problem," and we don't want to have any indications of a problem. We can't have a problem.
We can't have any foamologists out there.
Yeah.
Oh, I know. I like that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What were you guys' thoughts on the imaging mess when it came to this team saying, okay, we're supposed to find out if there's a problem, but we can't see anything, so let's try to see something? What are your thoughts on how that played out?
I don't know, if they're going to put a team together, then they need to have, there's got to be a way for them to without going through all the red tape and getting the right permission slips and okays and okie dokies and whatever. I mean, they need to have direct access to whatever kind of departments, whether it's the Department of Defense or whatever, to get those pictures and get to them as soon as possible. I mean, they did talk to one guy, what was his name? Hale. Yeah. Oh yeah, I'll take a look at it. And how long did it take him? It took him 5 days. Oh yeah, I guess I maybe ought to think about this. So I think that kind of stuff needed to be avoided, that they should have direct access somehow that they needed immediately.
Mm-hmm.
Just the thought that the whatever agency they called Linda Hammond and said, hey, we want these images. Who wants, people want these images. What for? And she's like, well, they didn't go through the proper channel, so don't do it. It's like,
right.
Yeah, don't do it.
They didn't have any of the tools. The team had, and I think you'll be interested to hear what Linda Ham had to say about the whole thing when we wrap up here, because man,
Oh boy.
Oh, I would like to know. I was hoping she'd get fired.
that team, that DAT team had zero tools, and and their recovery window was closing so fast because they couldn't. Not only could they not get information, when they tried to get information, they were shut down. And then when they were asked for information, they were asked in a way, "Hey, it's okay, right? It's okay. It's just foam, right? With this happened before, right?" And you could tell, like from the reading, it said in the very last meeting, the hall was full of people standing, listening. Like, okay, what are they going to do? What's going to be said? Everybody knew. There was some people had that kind of sense of, okay, is something wrong? But we're not supposed to say anything. I mean, come on, they didn't even tell the astronauts. I mean, it's just bizarre.
Well, they told them that there was a debris issue, and they're like, but it's no big deal. We just wanted to let you know in case reporters ask you questions.
And that was 7 days in.
Right.
Yep.
It's like where are your priorities? Are your priorities in the actual execution and safety and the overall mission goal, or is your priority in cutting as many corners as you can to make it,
to get what you want,
and just hope that it sticks to the wall? Like,
oh man,
that's all it was.
There's a thing in the agenda that talks about the concept of psychological safety in a team, that the climate of that team affected the behavior of that team. So they're like, well, they should have spoken up. They should have said more. It's like they were trying to express things in a way that they were hoping to be heard. They're like, we still have concerns. Here's the tests we ran with what we have. We're still concerned. And then they're like, oh, so we're okay then. Well, we're not done with the test, but though we're okay then. Well, based on what we have, we are. I mean, they changed the dynamic of that team's ability to function in so many ways. And does anybody have any thoughts on that? The actions of the DAT, like what role did they play? Should they have played a bigger role? Should they have tried harder? Is there something that they could have done more?
Probably not. Like I don't think they really could have done any more than they did. They voiced their concerns, and I guess other team leaders or managers at NASA were just too preoccupied to listen.
Yeah. As far as real world application, when you think about your own personal experiences, interactions, failures because of biases, whether or not you accept accountability when someone says, hey, this was on you, or because I found it really interesting that we all operate with bias to some degree.
Oh, yeah.
But when do we blind ourselves to it? And I wondered if you guys have any thoughts on personal experiences or anything that you've seen that stands out to you.
I was thinking of school, actually. When I get so caught up in my school, and my husband will tell me, and even sometimes my son will tell me, he'll just say, Mom, he said, seriously, you just gotta back off, and so sometimes I get so caught up in school, I gotta get this done, I gotta get that done, I gotta get that done, that my family suffers.
Sounds like our earlier discussion, Trevor.
Yeah, it does.
And so you have to back off, and that's where I get to the point where I have to write it down on my dates that are due, and I work around my school schedule to make sure that my family gets taken care of. And yeah, there's times I'm up a little bit later than I'd like to be to work on school, but then I also no regrets that day in regards to my family and dissing my family either. I mean, so there's got to be that balance where you decide what's most important and prioritize, and keep those priorities. I mean, you have to have someone do a check on you every once in a while and say, get it in line and get it together and realize what's most important.
That's what's so dangerous about the culture with NASA was there was no one doing the checking. There was no one calling them out.
Yep.
You know, it reminds me of the talk from conference where I talked about the eclipse. And if you put your thumb up to your eye, that little thumb can still block out the sun. You know, the sun is a pretty powerful thing, but man, if you hyper focus too much, you really do prevent yourself from seeing a lot. I was the phrase that came to my mind was that I was just from reading my scriptures. It was the wicked take the truth to be hard. You just don't want to hear it.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to hear the truth. You know, it hurts.
Definitely.
It does. No one likes being told that they're doing something wrong. I mean, that's so you do everything you can to avoid it, avoid listening to it or hearing it.
So I asked what principles kind of apply from our reading in our other reading, and I thought about that we really need time for honest assessment. Like your husband's asking you to, hey, step back. You know, my husband's done the same to me because Tamara, I have the same problem. I get so hung up with having to dot all my I's and cross all my T's with school that I forget to dot all my I's and cross my T's with my family. You know.
Yes.
But then a willingness to repair, you know, to really honestly assess and say, okay, this is going to be hard to fix, and then accepting consequences and fighting through the pain of the fix, even if it costs you personally. You know, like, you know, I'd rather lose my job and bring these people home. You know,
Yep.
I'd rather the next ship never goes up than ever let these 7 people not come home to their families who are waiting on the bleachers in Florida, you know,
Yes.
only to get that phone call, get those people off the field because the space shuttle went down over Texas. Well, I'm gonna read us some things about how things turned out, and then you guys share some thoughts if you'd like about a few of the things. That some of them I found kind of interesting. There was the investigation. It took about a month to collect the pieces that, you know, they did all they could to collect all they could from the ground, and they had little confidence that they'd be able to discover anything with the pieces they were finding. They talked about the effect of the it was a Nova thing that I watched on an unprepared public. You know, that because no one was told, the astronauts were oblivious, their families were oblivious. There was no preparation. There was no we did this, this, and this to save them. And people are out there, you know, praying for them, hoping they get back, you know, and then having some sense of closure. It was just this raw shock, you know, to everybody. And that anyway, they said all the conflicting design plans from all the different people trying to put in their 2 bits caused problems. They said the gathering debris, they gathered debris from Louisiana to Dallas, but they were really surprised when they got all the debris and they looked at it. They could identify the burn patterns. They identified the source of where it happened, and guess what? It was on the left wing. And they said, we think it has something to do with the foam. And this entire time, experts, highly educated people, NASA, they're like, there's no way. They're like, look at this piece of foam. It is, they estimated about a 10-inch square piece of foam, just a little piece of foam that if you held it in your hands would weigh about 1 pound. They're like, that's not going to do the damage, because they're like, there's no way. They weren't trying to cover in some ways at this point. They honestly could not see how this piece of foam that they were familiar with and they could hold in their hands could do any measure of damage to the wing. And then they were really frustrated because the investigative team decided to build a life-size model of the wing and just do a simple high school science experiment. They knew how fast the shuttle was going. They knew the size of the foam that fell off. They knew the speed of the foam that fell off. And they said, basic physics, basic physics, stuff they could have done just very quickly on the onset of this, even if they couldn't get a picture. So they took this time to construct this test wing. And and people were mocking them. They're like, they're wasting time, they're wasting money, they're wasting resources. They shot this foam at the wing. It blew a hole into the wing. It didn't just break the tiles. It blew a hole into the wing about 6 by 10. And they said the people that were doing the experiment immediately are like, yeah, oh, wait, ooh, it really did work. You know, they were like, oh, look, our experiment shows what happened. But then when they realized, wow, we just showed how these astronauts died, they said it was very sobering. The other interesting thing is they went to people would call and say, hey, we found some debris, and they would go out and they would investigate. And they went to a place, it turned out the debris was nothing. But as they were walking back to the car, they found a cassette tape in the median of the road. And it was the last recording of the flight crew before the ship blew up. There's actually, and they're completely oblivious. They're talking to each other, and they just found it in the median of the road, kind of this extra thick thing that looked like a cassette tape that they just kind of found on the fly in the middle of, I don't know, I think they were in Louisiana. But the conclusion of the investigation was that the management was negligent, that they held the engineers to unreasonable protocols but didn't follow their own protocols, and that they should not have risked life without compelling purpose. The Bush administration directed that we switch from trying to get men into space to just simple exploration. And the most interesting thing that I found was the interview with Linda Ham. She went to a televised interview and was crying and basically said, this wasn't anybody's fault. This wasn't
crap. Sorry.
It gets better. It gets better. This wasn't anybody's fault. This was an accident. It was tragic. I know people want to look to me, but I wasn't the only one working on the problem. There was a team working on the problem. They should have said more. We should have spoken up more. People should have stepped up more. She blamed the team.
Oh, that is so wrong.
Oh my gosh. And when, as I'm looking at this interview, and she's like, she said, if we would have known, we would have done everything in our power to bring them home. Everything. And I thought to myself about what I tell my children. If you swing a stick in a crowd of people and you hit someone, even though you didn't mean to hit anybody, it's still your fault.
It's not the crowd's fault for being there.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
So she said it was the team's fault for not being more aggressive in their assessment. Was basically what she came down to. And I mean, I was just floored that she's like, this is nobody's fault. And this is, it's just like they were so hyper-focused they didn't see. And you think to yourself, really, what are the chances they could have been saved, right? And because those EVAs, when they go out of the ship, right, when they go out into space, they practice those for almost 12 months. And they do practice underwater. They go through all the routines over and over and over again before they do those spacewalks. And so they're very complex, right? But there was all kinds of people after the fact. They're like, oh, yeah, well, you can always say that in hindsight, we could have done this and we could have done that. And the fact was they could have. They could have. They talked about they could have flown over to the space station and ferried them to the space station. They could have sent up Atlantis. They had a ship ready. They had a ship ready to go. They could have sent up with supplies. They could have done something to show that they valued the life of these 7 people, even if they failed. And the cool, look back at the Apollo 13 mission and the innovative ways they came up because they cared about bringing those people home. And so I'm not sorry that the program's done. I just thought, did you guys know, this is the other interesting thing I found out. They estimated those flights at 5.57 million. Every flight was between 500 million and $1 billion.
Jeez.
Every single flight. They said they never released that to the public.
Good grief.
Billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars. What a waste. That was my take. Anyway, would you guys like to share any closing thoughts on that?
So I'm going to assume that woman now has a job in like politics, right?
I'm gonna look up all
Find out.
Because that's some crazy spin. Like if you're ruthless and heartless enough to like to say those things about something as as widespread as that story was. I mean, it was in the news for a long time. If you're able to say with that kind of stuff with a straight face, like maybe, I mean, not that I would want you in politics, but that's the place for you.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, that's crazy.
It says on her Wikipedia, on the Wikipedia page, no one was individually blamed for what happened. And I know from some stuff that I looked up that there were people that thought heads should have rolled. People died. I mean, what's the difference? You take a life. When do you get to call it, negligent homicide? Yep. This says Ham was demoted and transferred out of her management position. Let's see. But it does not say. I'm going to look up something here.
Yeah, that doesn't, I mean, sad to say it doesn't surprise me, but it's kind of what I expected.
She's on LinkedIn. Yeah.
No, thank you.
She is at a university.
Oh, even better.
Yeah. Here's her experience. Constellation Program Transition Manager, lead and integrate the Constellation Program efforts and the Space Shuttle Program. Technological Integration Manager, Hydrogen Program Integration Manager. That was after the accident. Manager of Program Integration, NASA. Technical Assistant, NASA. Now she works at Rice Business Jones Graduate School of Business. Anyway.
Wow.
Wow. Yeah.
What a story.
Wow. University of Wisconsin, NASA Aeronautics. Yeah, she's a piece of work.
Yep.
So, has anyone seen the movie The Martian?
No.
Well, I'll tell you the premise because it doesn't give anything away. Matt Damon, his character, is part of a team that's on Mars, right? Like humans on Mars. Anyway, after an accident, his team leaves and he gets left behind. And so it's the story of him, trying to make contact with people back on Earth, trying to figure out what they can do. I thought it was actually a really good movie. Like, it was pretty good.
Does it? Okay, you have to tell me.
Oh, we lost you, Tamara.
Can you say that again?
Oh, there you go. Try again.
Did he make it back?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it was written. This guy kind of crowdsourced the science behind it. So he'd write it and then he'd post like the chapters online, and people would give him like they would criticize like, okay, this scientifically this wouldn't work. So he really got a lot of experts to like look at it, and it reminds me of this exact thing, the problem at hand, how to solve the problem, and actually going around and coming up with a solution. It's kind of like what was the Apollo movie, Apollo 13?
Apollo 13.
Yeah, it's kind of like that, but instead of their problem, this guy's on Mars, like even further away. So
yep.
I'd recommend it.
Huh. Okay.
I'm looking up. There's one more thing on Linda Ham here.
Oh, boy.
This is interesting. Linda Ham was the SSP Flight Operations Integration Manager, etc. Linda is an outstanding technical expert. Her judgment is superior. She's very energetic and hardworking, and she bore the brunt of the media firestorm after Columbia becoming a scapegoat for the accident. That was written in 2012.
What?
Yeah. Wow.
Like I said, there was some political issues at work that definitely contributed to this incident.
Yep.
Yeah. Now she's in Denver. Organizing government energy initiatives. Yeah, so she's still working in the government, it says. Almost overnight, the 43-year-old engineer went from being one of the National Aeronautics Space Administration's best and brightest to a lightning rod for media criticism.
Well, gee, I wonder why.
Yeah.
See.
Hmm.
Oh, now she says, there isn't a day that goes by that I don't think about it. I'm accountable and fully responsible for the decisions made. Well, that's nice that she said it out loud. This was 2013. Yeah. We did the best we could with what we knew, she says.
No, that's wrong.
Wow. Let's see. Anyway.
And they knew only what they wanted to hear.
Yeah, that was the thing where she said, hey, I was working from my team's assessment. What am I supposed to do? You know, you're like, I don't know, give the team the tools to assess properly.
Yes.
Anyway, so yeah, interesting case. You know, I think, you know, when I was thinking about my week assessment, thinking, okay, you know, these cases are great if we can personally apply them and ask ourselves, is there something that we've blinded ourselves to? Are there certain realities that we accept as true because they make us comfortable? Are there, like, for instance, Tamara, I was bent on, I got to get school done, and at a great cost, and it ended up where instead of being able to continue with school, I had to take a semester off because of issues with the family and with my son, and my husband and I sat down, and I was so focused on, I got to get done, 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 mm-hmm. at great cost. And you know, I find myself at facing registration tomorrow and having to ask myself, what's the right thing to do? What is the reality that I live in, and what is sufficient? And you know, slow down, don't be in a rush, and make, you know, because we don't realize sometimes that the decisions we're making are critical, and we may not see the big picture all the time, but you know, I think we get red flags, and there was lots of red flags in this case, and I just kind of would encourage you guys to kind of do some self-application and say, do I have any red flags that I need to say honestly? You know, eventually this might lead to a train wreck, you know?
Yes.
I gotta make adjustments, and then sometimes it does lead to a train wreck, and we can either blame or we can adjust, you know? So anyway, that's what I just kind of encourage you guys to think about. Wish Jace had been here. Would have been fun to hear his input. He says he had a internship interview that went long, so we can feel bad for him and move on from there. So a quick question before we head out. The Wednesday of the week of Thanksgiving, do we want to move that meeting to Monday or Tuesday? Do we want to think about that?
Yeah, I'd be fine with that.
It's the 22nd. Let me take a look at the meeting. Let's look at the group leaders sign up and see where we're at there. Because that's week, let's see, we're in week 8, 9, 10, that's week 11. Week 11 is, oh, guess what? We don't have a group meeting in week 11.
Oh, maybe our teacher is nice because it is Thanksgiving.
Yep, I have this week. Jace has next week. Tamara, you have week 10, 8, 9, yep. So the 15th. And then I'll pick up the last one, lesson 12.
Okay.
So I guess we're good.
We're good.
Awesome.
I got a big pie. I got pies to bake.
Yeah, that's a lot more important than a group meeting.
Yeah. Well, all right. Well, good luck with your registration, Trevor.
Oh, thanks. I'm sure it'll work out.
We're all good. All right. You guys have a great day, and we'll talk to you later.
You too.
Thanks.
Okay.
We'll see you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.